take every treasure, take this life. Everything's on the altar now. No holding back, no holding out.
Thanks for joining me on day 3 of Core Practice 6, and it's about giving with joy and giving in a sacrificial way. We're going to look now in Matthew chapter 23, where Jesus says at verse 23, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices." Let me just pause for a moment. You give a tenth of your spices. This is the idea of a tithe, T-I-T-H-E. Maybe you've not familiar with that term, or you hear it in church, you don't really know what it means. You think it's just synonymous with giving something. No, it's the idea of giving a tenth of what you have. And it is this principle is taught throughout Scripture, all the way back into Genesis. And Jesus is saying, congratulations, you give a tenth. But he's going to point out to them that that's not the end of the ball game. You give a tenth of your spices. So it's great. They give a tenth of not only the big stuff in their life, but even the small stuff, the mint, the dill, the cumin. But you have neglected the more important matters of the law, or the more important matters of God's instruction. Things like justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. And so what Jesus is saying is this is not an either or. It's not like, well, you can decide to be generous towards God's work with your money, with your stuff, or you can be about serving people with justice and mercy. He's saying, no, it's about both of those. It's not either or, it's both and. By the way, he says here, the more important matters of God's instruction or God's law. That means that the idea of the tenth is an important matter. There are just more important matters. By the way, if you'd like to see a little more of a discussion on the tithe, you can Google that, and they can show you different things in the Bible. But one of the most striking discussions is in Malachi chapter 3, verses 6 to 12, where God is saying, if you had been tithing, as I had instructed you to do, I would be blessing you. But instead, you've chosen to rob me. And that's how God views it, described in Malachi 3, is I told you to give a tenth, you weren't giving a tenth, so you're robbing me. And the consequence of that is rather than feeling blessed, you are going to feel cursed. So what are our takeaways from this teaching here in Matthew 23, as well as in Malachi 3? Well, the takeaways are this, is that God is not indifferent to our giving. I've tried to hammer that home this week. He will respond to our faith and love, or our lack of faith or love in this regard, in one way or the other. We will either experience His blessing, or we will negate that. We will make ourselves not available to those kinds of blessing that comes from us being generous towards His work. But the second thing is that giving, or specifically tithing, is not the bottom line. The bottom line is our love that is expressed in obedience. One way we express that is through our finances, but it's not the bottom line. It is not the one way we measure how spiritually mature we are. We can excel at giving and still miss God's heart. So we can give, we can write big checks and still miss God's heart. We can miss His concern about mercy and faithfulness and caring for people that are in need. We can miss that because we just think, hey, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. I used to give 10%, now I'm even giving 13%. We can miss it. That's not the only measure. But let me say this. I don't see how we can neglect sacrificially giving and still obediently love God. So I'm not saying it's the only thing, it's not the biggest thing, but it's not something we can say, well, it's optional. Jesus is clear about it. When Jesus puts some of the very fundamental practices that He expects from us, giving to the needy, is one of those practices. And so may the Lord give you clarity. May He encourage you in giving you've been doing. May He help you understand that He is pleased with it and that He's using it for His glory. And if there's things He needs to continue to correct in you, may you be open-minded and open-hearted to that.
Take every treasure, take this life. Oh, that I am for all that you are.